for the sake of the video, since I just started recording it again, because I forgot to do it earlier, we're going to read through the section one more time, and also we've had more people walk in, so that makes sense to read through it one more time. But I'm not going to be the one who does that, so could I have somebody else read verses 25 through 31 for us real quick, and then we'll actually get to our questions. All right, go for it, George. Loud and clear. Just do ESV.
Yes, and some of the people of Jerusalem therefore said, "It's not this man whom they seek to kill, and here he is, speaking openly, and they say nothing to him. Can it be that the authorities would know that this is the Christ? But we know where this man comes from, and when the Christ appears, no one will know where he comes from." So Jesus proclaimed as taught in the temple, "You know me, and you know where I come from, but I have not come of my own accord. He who sent me is true, and him you do not know. I know him, for I come from him, and he sent me." So they were seeking to arrest him, but no one laid a hand on him, because his hour had not yet come. Yet many of the people believed in him. They said, "When the Christ appears, what will he do more signs than this man has done?"
Perfect. All right, thank you, George. Okay, so let's just start by going into verse 25. What questions do we have going into this passage? What is the context? Thank you, Jonathan. That is always the most important question to start off any Bible study. And because, like I said, I mean, a lot of us have been here in the past weeks. But if you haven't, that's an important question to know. And even if you have, it's an important question to ask, because most likely we've all forgotten the context by the time we get to this week, right? So what is the context of this? We're in verse 25 of chapter 7, which means there are 24 verses. And in this instance, these are actually all taking place. It's basically one continuous story. So those are actually pretty important to understanding this. So what's the context of chapter 7? All right, there's a feast. What feast is it? And remember, try to talk a little bit loud so that Ben can hear.
The Feast of Shelters.
Feast of Shelters, Feast of Tabernacles, Feast of Booths.
Yeah, look it up.
Okay, and what was that feast? What's the importance of that feast? Yes, it is. Yes, Feast of Tabernacles. Right, so this is a way you can remember it. Whenever you hear the word tabernacle, remember that there's this thing called the tabernacle in the Old Testament, thing called the temple, right? The temple is, once they got to Jerusalem, they built like a solid structure where God's presence would dwell. The tabernacle was the thing that they carried around with them. It was a big tent that they carried around starting out when they were wandering in the wilderness, right? And it was a shelter, basically a tent where God's presence would dwell. And so the Feast of Tabernacles is something that they would do each year in like September or October. They would build little shacks basically for themselves to commemorate their time in the wilderness, right? So that's a way you can remember that. The Feast of Tabernacles, the Feast of Booths, it's their time in the wilderness whenever they would celebrate how God provided for them even when they were in the wilderness on the way to the Promised Land. So that's a way to remember that. They still do it to this day. They build like little booths, little shacks, little lean-to things, basically to celebrate that God will provide for them and the people of Israel, right? So that's where they're at. It's September, October. They're at the Feast of Tabernacles. What has been going on thus far in the chapter? At the beginning, we have Jesus with his brothers. What happens there?
They kind of taunt him, like he's saying like he should go in, like with like big fanfare, I think.
Mm.
That's kind of implied.
Yeah.
And then he's like, no. And then he goes in on his own and starts preaching, like without making it obvious who he is, I think.
Yeah, so basically what we have there, we have the, he's interacting with his brothers. They don't believe in him. They say, oh, if you really are the Christ, what you should do, you should go make yourself known. Like, let people know you are the Christ. Go show up, make a big public scene, let people know who you are, gather your people together. Jesus says, no, my time has not yet come. I'm not going to do that. He ends up going secretly on his own, right? Instead of making a big show, he ends up just going privately, and on one day he just starts teaching, right? So he gets up in the middle of the feast. People have been wondering where he's at. He starts teaching. He shows up without a big scene. Other times, we've already read about it in chapter 2 when he showed up at Passover. Sometimes he'll make big scenes, right? He will flip tables. He will cause a big ruckus. This time he doesn't do that. He just shows up, he stands up, he starts teaching. What is he teaching about, and what's the big deal about it?
The one who sent him.
Yes, he starts talking about the one who sent him, namely because as he stands up, he's delivering apparently it's an amazing sermon. We don't really know what it is, but he's preaching something really good, and the religious leaders and the Jews around are saying, how is it that this man can teach such good teachings when he's never had the proper training? And this causes an entire discussion to break out where he says, hey, the reason I can do this is because I came from, he doesn't explicitly state it, but he's implying that he comes from heaven and God is the one giving him these things to say. He says, I'm not teaching my own words. I'm teaching the things that the one who sent me has taught me to say. Obviously, he is God in the flesh, so he could easily pull an Aslan and he could say, I was there when it was written. He could do that, but he doesn't. Instead, he gives the glory to the Father, right? He could say, oh, because I'm God and I can teach whatever I want, but he doesn't do that. Instead, he says, the man who speaks on his own authority is speaking basically out of pride, whereas the person who gives his glory to another, you know that what he's speaking is truth because he has nothing to gain from it, right? So basically, he's turning the question back at the people who are talking to him because they typically speak off their own authority and they are thinking, oh, it's the seminary degrees and the experience in rabbi school. Those are the things that give you credibility to speak because they think that it's like it comes from your own authority. Jesus says, no, the authority, if you have any authority, it's got to come from God. And so you don't have to have the seminary degree. You don't have to have the rabbi school stuff. You just need to know the Bible, right? And if you know the Bible well, you can teach the Bible. You just need to make sure that you're speaking on God's authority and not on the authority given you by man, right? A degree doesn't count for anything if your teaching is wrong. Your authority has to come from God. And so that's an important application for ourselves, right? We need to know, I'm going to seminary right now. That does not make me inherently better than any person in here because I could go to seminary, I could have a degree, I could have everything totally wrong, right? The main thing you need to know is that our authority has to come from God. Me saying, ooh, I've got a master in theology doesn't mean I'm actually a master of theology. It just means that people signed a document and gave me the degree and I can hang it up. That doesn't actually give me authority, right? These people were thinking it does. Jesus says no. The person who gives his glory to another, you know what they're saying is true because they're not trying to gain anything out of it. If I go around saying, if you were to say, David, why do we trust what you say? And I say, well, I went to Dallas Theological Seminary. Well, what I'm doing there is I'm boasting, right? I'm saying the reason you should trust me is because I am awesome, right? Look at my degrees. Look at what I've done. Look at my resume. This is why you can trust me. I'm not giving glory to God. What I'm doing is I'm boasting myself. It could be that I learned a lot from DTS, but I'm using that for my own personal gain. Whereas Jesus here, he's actually pointing out we need to be giving God the glory. And if somebody really is pointing to God in all they're doing, they're probably more trustworthy because they're less likely to have a bias that's pointing towards themselves, right? They're humbly approaching things. And so that's what Jesus says. And then basically they just have this whole debate where they end up talking about circumcision and stuff on the Sabbath and all this stuff. And Jesus ends up saying that they want to kill him, right? You try to kill me. And they say, whoa, 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 you have a demon. They're probably not actually accusing him of having a demon. Most likely, it's kind of like saying, you dummy. Like, what are you talking about, right? They're kind of sarcastically. There are other times in the Gospels where it does seem like they are accusing him of having a demon. And he takes that very seriously. And he's like, don't say that. Right here, it seems like they're more to be like, who do you think you are saying that? Who's trying to kill you? And that's very important. The reason I bring that up is because the passage we're about to read has some implications. It picks up on that same thing. So that's the main context of what's been happening, right? Jesus has been in this debate We actually don't know what he was teaching prior to this. We just know what they've been debating about in the prior verses. And so we proceed. What is the next question that we have for verse 25?
They talk about how or they ask themselves, is it not when they seek to kill, do they not already know that?
Yeah.
To even bother to say that?
Okay, so we've got these people, and they're saying, is this not the person they seek to kill? So that actually raises a few questions, right? Who are the people speaking, and who is the they who are wanting to kill Jesus, right? Him, whenever you're saying him, that'd be Jesus, obviously, right? So who's speaking, and who are the they who are wanting to kill Jesus? Let's start with the first part. Who's speaking here?
Just the Jewish people in the crowd.
Yeah, so it says some of the people of Jerusalem, right? So these are the people who, they're not the same people who were debating with Jesus prior to this, right? These are other people in the crowd who are speaking up. Like if you were to imagine this like in a movie, right? Basically, you've got Jesus and these religious leaders debating back and forth. And then the scene like pans out and it cuts to these people in the crowd and they're talking to each other, right? And now these are these people speaking here, right? You can visualize it in your mind. And they're saying, is not this the man whom they seek to kill? So who is the they? The authorities, right? The people who are just debating. So why is this ironic?
Because they just said that no one was trying to.
Yeah. Jesus just accused them saying, you seek to kill me. And they're like, who seeks to kill you? And then the people in the crowd are like, don't they seek to kill him? Like, so basically everybody is aware of the fact that these leaders want to kill Jesus, but the leaders, they have to deny it, right? Because who are these people who are like, who are these authorities? What is their role? Well, these people aren't Romans. These are, where are they at right now? What were you, what, Finn?
I was gonna say it was to regulate what's being taught.
Yes. So these are people working in the temple, regulating what's being taught, and these are supposed to be holy priests, people who are, devoted to God. And so they can't just be admitting that they want to kill somebody because that's not a godly thing, right? It's one thing to desire God's justice to be brought about. It's a whole nother thing to actively desire to have somebody murdered. So these people, they cannot rightfully be like, yeah, we want Jesus dead, especially because Jesus hasn't done anything. Like Jesus has proven this time and time again. They have nothing to raise against him, right? He's given them no reason to desire to kill him. Yet everybody knows, right? That's why there was even talk about it ahead of time. Remember back in verse 13, or verses 12 and 13, and there was much muttering about him among the people. While some said he's a good man, others said, no, he's leading people astray. Yet for fear of the Jews, no one spoke openly about him, right? So everybody was talking about Jesus before he showed up, but they didn't speak openly about it because they were afraid of the Jews because they knew that these people wanted to kill Jesus, which that should be a very terrifying, you know that your religious leaders are a little bit corrupt whenever you're afraid to speak your mind in front of them because you know that they want to kill the person you're talking about and you think they might want to kill you just because you're talking about them. That probably means that there's some corruption going on here, right? These are men of God, yet they actively desire to kill somebody. That's scary. And so that's the irony here, right? Jesus accused them, they denied it, but everybody in the crowd knows that it's true. What would that imply about what Jesus has been saying so far? That it's true, right? Yeah, so it wasn't a trick question. It implies that what he's saying is correct, right? Right here, he's saying, my words are true, you seek to kill me. They're saying, your words aren't true, we don't want to kill you. But everybody in the crowd's like, yeah, they do. So just by their denying it, they're demonstrating that they're in the wrong here, right? But they're fighting to make it seem like they're in the right. So that's interesting. But let's move on. What other? Also, real quick, one question I'd written down is what is the therefore? Because it says some of the people of Jerusalem therefore said. That's always a good question to ask, because if it says therefore, that means it's building off of something in the past. We've already answered the question here, but I'm trying to get us in the mindset of, right now I lead this group kind of, but I want us to get in the mindset of if you were sitting down with somebody else, how would you teach it to them? That's a question you would want to answer. We've already answered it because the therefore, like it says, some of the people therefore said, why are they saying this? Well, it's because these people just denied wanting to kill Jesus. Therefore, these people are saying, don't they want to kill him? Right? So that's why it says therefore. Every time it says therefore, you know it's building off of something prior. So every time you see therefore, say, what is the therefore? We've already answered it, but that's just something I wanted to point out to y'all, just to help us get in the mindset of teaching this to other people. So what other questions do we have about verse 26, if any? Verse 25, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, verse 25. Oh, Finn, did you have one? Oh, never mind.
Wait. My questions are on 26 and 27.
Oh, okay, cool. Do we have any more about 25? Okay, so some of the people of Jerusalem therefore said, is not this the man whom they seek to kill? And here he is speaking openly, and they say nothing to him. Can it be that the authorities really know that this is the Christ? All right, what questions do we have about verse 26? Ben, go for it.
How did the people know that Jesus is the Christ, and why didn't they react with reverence?
That is a good question. Okay, so how did they know he is the Christ? And if they did know that, why aren't they responding more reverently? Why aren't they getting on their knees and just bowing down to him right now?
I think the second part we already answered. Because they fear the authorities and what they'll do if they show that.
Yeah, I think it's a multifaceted answer. I think there's many reasons why, but I think that's probably one of the predominant ones, right? So one of the main reasons why they don't just bow down before him right now is because they are afraid of the authorities. Like, for all they know, I mean, these authorities have the power to kick them out of the temple, kick them out of the synagogues, excommunicate them, do a lot of stuff. Right? These people have a lot of authority, and as we're going to see, they're eventually going to have Jesus killed. There's probably a good reason why they don't respond well, but because what we're going to see also is that a lot of times the people's boldness to stand up for Jesus really does not happen until after the resurrection. Even his closest 12, Peter's going to deny Jesus the night that he's arrested. So a lot of people, even though they know, Peter has already declared, "You are the Christ, the Son of God," all this stuff. He's still going to deny Jesus. A lot of the boldness comes after the resurrection when they're like, okay, we're 100% confident now. But I think another reason would be that their view of the Christ was very different than our view of the Christ. Right nowadays, we can look back and we realize that the Messiah, the Christ, he's a lot more than just a king who comes in to conquer the Romans. We realize that he's God in the flesh, that he's the savior of the world. We realize this guy, we deserve, if Jesus were to walk in right now, I would hope that every single one of us would just get on our knees, face to the ground, and just start worshiping, right? Or begging for forgiveness, something. They had a little bit of a different view. And so I think that the fact that they're surrounding around him does show a little bit of the reverence, right? It shows that they're intrigued. They're wanting to see what happens here. But they also are afraid of the Jews, and they're like, okay, what's going on here? But then what was the first part of your question again, Finn? It was just, how do these people know he's the Christ? Right? Okay, yeah, because in verse 26, and here he is speaking openly, and they say nothing to him. Can it be the authorities really know that this is the Christ? So Finn takes this to mean that these people believe that Jesus is the Christ. Is that what this means? It could. Or what do y'all think?
Some of them maybe, and some of them are it gives more reason to believe that, like, that he could be than before, where they're just talking about, like, the people talking about what he's said, and then the people who are supporting him based on his actions. Now he's talking and teaching in the temple, and the religious leaders who everybody knows they want to kill him aren't doing anything against him, so they're like, maybe just more of a reason to believe.
Yeah, what we're seeing is that there's actually still ambiguity here. So this right here, I wouldn't take this to be a confirmation that these people 100% believe, but I think by the end of this passage, some of them are going to get there. Because whenever they're saying, can it be the authorities really know that this is the Christ? It's not necessarily saying, oh, that they know as well. It's saying, ooh, maybe the authorities know something we don't. Because we're still trying to figure out if Jesus is the Christ. Maybe these guys actually know. But also, I think there's some sarcasm in what they're saying. Were you going to say something, Dylan?
Yeah, I think we talked about a little last week, maybe. Would that be where the difference kind of from people having books like we have nowadays versus when what they had back then, where they didn't really have all the access to the books? It's like they didn't necessarily have access to read all the Old Testament that prophesied about them. They just heard some of them, but they didn't necessarily have all of the different ones kind of memorized.
Yeah, that could contribute. That could contribute a lot to it. Nowadays, it's a lot easier for just the layperson to know a lot about the Bible. Unfortunately, we don't take advantage of that as often as we should. So nowadays, people are a lot less biblically literate than they should be, being that every single person can have a Bible in their home. We should know the Bible a lot better than we do. Back then, the average Jew knew the Old Testament a million times more than we know the Bible right now. And that's with them not having their own personal copy of it with them all the time, right? But I do think that does contribute to it, because they definitely viewed the religious leaders as people who knew the scriptures way better than them. And so they're saying, okay, maybe these people have some inside information and they know that Jesus is the Christ, and that's why they're not arresting him. But at the same time, I think there's also some sarcasm here, because I think this is very similar to how John is going to quote the blind man later on when we get to chapter 10, or chapter 9, I believe. Is it 9 or 10? Chapter 9. In chapter 9, whenever he's like, oh, do you too want to become one of his disciples? I think they're kind of sarcastically being like, these people want to kill him, yet they're not doing it. I wonder if that means that they think he's the Christ. Really, the implication would be that the authorities are also afraid of Jesus, right? They're saying that the only reason that they're not acting is because they're afraid of him, right? So, because it wouldn't really make sense if these people actually believed he was the Christ, because why would they want to kill him? You know, so to me, it seems like they're being sarcastic here. They're saying, oh, they want to kill him, yet he speaks openly in front of them, yet they don't even do anything about it. Maybe they think he's the Christ. It's more just like they're sarcastically being like, okay. But like, does that make sense? Like how I've kind of...
I think it's the wording too. It says no. They know. Like we would say, do they think he is that person?
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's still the way they meant it doesn't necessarily mean that they do know. It's just I don't know how to say it, but it's just the way it's worded could also mean they think. Like, do they think the fact?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of like a modern like analogy of it. I guess you could just make it like say that Chris was walking around claiming to be the Christ, right? And say that Jonathan had the authority to kill Chris. And he evidently had the desire to kill Chris, right? Say that Jonathan not only had the authority to do it, but it was evident he actively desired to kill Chris. Every time Chris walks in, Jonathan gives him this look that's like, I want you dead, right? Every single time he walks in, Jonathan looks at him that way. Every time Chris walks in, like everybody else gets tense. Every time Chris walks in, because they're like, this might be the day. Like Jonathan might kill Chris right now, right? Imagine this. Like everybody gets tense. It's scary. You're like, okay. But then Chris comes in. He starts teaching these amazing teachings. You can see Jonathan getting redder and redder as Chris is teaching, and he's obviously angry. They start debating back and forth, and all of us are sitting there, and we're thinking, man, it's so evident that Jonathan hates Chris. And he has the ability to kill him, yet he's not doing it. Maybe Jonathan actually knows something we don't know. Maybe Jonathan actually knows that Chris is the Christ. Obviously, Jonathan doesn't know that, because if he did, he wouldn't want to kill Chris. We're saying that sarcastically because we're like, that's the only justifiable reason why he wouldn't kill him, when really the reason would be that they're afraid of him. Like, right, Jonathan's afraid of what Chris can do. He's like, I don't know. And also, Jonathan would be afraid of the people, right? Because if Jonathan goes and kills Chris, Jonathan knows that we all love Chris. And if they do that, we are going to now, like if Jonathan goes and kills Chris, now we might rebel against Jonathan and cause this huge issue. And you got to realize the Jews, they did not want issues, right? They did not want rebellion. They didn't want any of that stuff. They'd had that in the past. It did not work out well, right? And so they're trying to fight for peace here. And so I think that might be a way of just imagining this. So I think that's kind of what they're getting at here.
Yeah, and I think that could be ways that people outside of this were looking at it too. Like Jews during that time who weren't necessarily thinking the same way the Pharisees were thinking, but they were like, well, why aren't the Pharisees actually, if this guy, because they've had other people rise up and claim to be the Messiah before and start rebellions.
Yes.
And so they're like, this guy isn't really doing that. Like, it's not the same as it was before. It didn't look like the same thing. And so people might have been thinking, like, is this guy the real deal? Because, like, all these teachings, like, are far beyond us to even understand, and it sounds like he wasn't even trained in this, but it sounds like he already knows it.
What we're going to see, ironically, is that the Jewish leaders' hard-heartedness and their rejection of Jesus is actually going to push these people in toward to believe in Jesus. It's actually really ironic. By the end of the passage, it's going to be, they're like, oh, we believe in him. Mainly because these people, they're debating. Jesus says, you desire to kill me. They're like, we don't desire to kill you. And they're looking out at the crowd. We don't desire to kill him. Not to get political here, but imagine this, they're basically pulling Hillary Clinton right now, right? It's like, no, we're innocent here. And everybody's like, are you? Maybe, I don't know, you might be innocent of what you're saying right now, but we know that you got some skeletons in your closet, right? And so it's kind of one of those things you're like, I don't know. Right now, it's kind of, in their attempt to save their face, once again, their pride is honestly, they should just admit here. The best thing they can do is be like, hey, Jesus, you're right.
Yeah.
We have not had the best of intentions towards you. We're sorry about that. We were in the wrong. That's the best thing they can do. Instead, they're denying it. And in doing that, they're proving Jesus all the more. Jesus says, you're wanting to kill me. They're saying, no, we're not. And everybody's like, yeah, y'all do. Y'all do want to kill him. And so they're actually unintentionally pointing them towards Jesus by proving that Jesus' words are true, which is really cool. I keep checking this because some people, there's some people who might come today and they've never been to the church before. And so I'm checking to make sure, they're not just stuck, waiting outside trying to figure out how to get in.
Yeah.
But okay.
Do they leave the doors open until a certain time?
I've told them to leave them.
I've gotten here late pretty much every time. So.
Yeah. So
Right.
At
they,
least till 7:30.
It was open.
yeah. Well, some people they don't know where we're at.
Right. Yeah.
Big church. So, okay. So, and here he is speaking openly, and they say nothing to him. One question I wrote down here is, what does it mean by he's speaking openly? Okay. Yeah. So what does that mean? He's speaking openly. What do they mean there?
It's not like a private conversation. He's kind of just talking to the crowd in general, not so specific.
Yeah. And this is actually something that's going to come back into play later on when Jesus is on trial.
Yeah.
Because they're going to start asking him stuff. They're going to be like, oh, what did you teach this? Did you teach this? And Jesus is going to be a little bit sarcastic. He's going to be like, I taught this openly in the presence of everybody. Why don't you ask everybody else what I said? Don't because basically they're trying to get him to self-incriminate himself. Right? He says, go ask everybody else. I taught it openly. And then they're going to smack him and say, how dare you speak to the high priest this way? But what he's saying is true, right? Right here, John's saying, he spoke openly, right? And even the crowd is acknowledging this. They're saying, hey, Jesus is speaking openly. They evidently want to kill him. And I guess he's giving them all the ammunition they need. So why don't they do anything about it? There's like this ironic thing. He's not hiding himself, right? He's out here in public. They evidently want to arrest him. And they're saying, why don't these Jewish people do what they so evidently want to do? And why don't they?
Well, I think part of it's because he's the true high priest, and they don't have the authority to. Like, they think they have the authority to, but they don't have the real authority.
So that would be our answer, right? Our answer would be like,
Right.
obviously they don't. But from their perspective, what's holding them back? Like, what is like every time Jesus shows up, they have like their blood just starts boiling because they're like, we want to kill this guy. What's keeping them from doing it? Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's the people,
Yeah.
then there's also the fact that they really don't have much to go off of here.
Yeah. And then like the Romans kind of come down on them if there's too much discourse in the area.
Mhm.
Like they'll snuff it out real quick.
Yeah, do y'all remember whenever they come up to Jesus? I don't think it's in this gospel. I think it's another one. I think it's actually in a few of them. They come up to him and they say, on whose authority do you teach? And then he says, okay, I'll ask you a question. And if you answer my question, I will answer your question. And he says, where did John get his authority? Was he from man or was he from God? And this stumps them because he's talking about John the Baptist, right? And it stumps them because they know that either answer will get them in trouble. Because if they say John came from man, well, there's a lot of people around who thought that John came from God and they were baptized. And if they say that John came from God, like from man, they're going to make a lot of enemies because people are going to be like, no, John the Baptist evidently came from God. And it seems like they knew that because if you remember at the beginning of the Gospel of John, they sent people to go check on it and be like, we know that you come from God. But if they answer that John came from God, the answer would be, then why did you have him killed? Right? Because the thing is, what you'll see in the Old Testament, this is a running thing, every time a prophet of God comes, the Jewish people end up killing them. And Jesus is going to say, that's what y'all do to me as well, right? But that seems to be the same thing happening here. Because what ends up happening, they don't answer Jesus' question, right? We don't know whether John came from man or God. And he says, neither will I tell you where I get my authority, right? Because the implication would be that he gets it from the same place John gets it.
And then they said nothing after.
Yes. Hey, Ruslan, how's it going? Long time no
Yeah,
see.
it's been a minute.
Yeah. Take a seat, my friend. Yeah, anyway. But yeah, so right
So
here,
by any words, I mean I can sit
Yes.
right there in the middle of the
yes,
couch.
you can sit right there if you want. Yeah,
Get
so,
as snuggly as possible.
yes.
Yes.
But
Oh man, where's my voted sticker?
I don't know. But the implication would be, it's the same thing here. The reason why they're not acting is because they are afraid of the people. And that's why what we'll see, whenever they finally do meet with Judas in a few months, the implication is that really, there's a reason why they end up arresting Jesus at nighttime. It's because that's the only time they could get away with this without causing a huge rebellion. And it's going to become even more intense whenever Jesus turns to Judas the evening before Passover and says, what you do, go and do it quickly. Because it seems like what they're wanting to do, their plans are actually to, we're in John chapter 7. Their plans are actually to wait until after Passover to go arrest Jesus. Because by then, all the pilgrims would be leaving and stuff. And they'd be able to do it under the radar. But instead, Jesus decides that it's going to happen the night before Passover, which means that they have to go arrest him, crucify him, and get him off the cross all before the Passover festival starts to begin,
Yes.
right? And so all of a sudden, Jesus is like, you got to do it quickly. And it's like, oh no. But so they have to sneak in at nighttime, and they have to get it all done so that by the time everybody's waking up in the morning, Jesus is already hanging on the cross, and there's nothing that can be done about it. So that's like why they're not acting right now. Is because it's the middle of the day, right? It's the middle of a festival in the middle of the day. This would be the worst possible time to arrest Jesus. But they are already behind the scenes plotting it, which once again further condemns them. Because the Jews right here, they're asking, okay, these people evidently want to kill Jesus. Why aren't they doing anything about it? Well, the reason why is because it's shady business, right? If they were going to do this in public, that would imply that they actually had good reason. The fact that they have to do it at nighttime shows that there's something to hide, right? So even that testifies against them.
So was that one of the reasons why they stabbed Jesus with the spear instead of letting him die slowly? Because I know that he was like taking a while, so like wrap it up.
Well, that's why they broke the thieves' legs. They broke the thieves' legs because they needed them to die quickly. Jesus was already dead, and so they said, "Don't break his bones, stab him." And then whenever they stabbed him, blood and water came out, and that was a sign that he was already dead, and also probably the fact that he didn't like move, you know. But that is why they broke the thieves' legs, because they needed, sometimes crucifixion could last multiple days, which is terrible. But and that's why it was also interesting that Jesus died so quickly, right? He died within 6 hours, which implies to us that there was something a lot more than just physical going on there. First off, he probably went through more physical punishment prior, like he was flogged ahead of time, so there's a lot more that goes into that. We'll get into that in about 5 years when we get to the end of John, but
But he was the only one that could give up his own spirit.
yes, and also he had like the sin of the world on him, right? So he had a lot more. So he was out in 6 hours, but the other people, they were still alive and kicking, not kicking, their feet were nailed to a cross. But so eventually they said they broke their legs so that they would suffocate, right? Because a lot of times whenever you're on the cross, you'd be doing like the dance of death, where you're like cycling up and down, like because you'd be when you're hanging down, you're suffocating. But then when you push back up, you can breathe for a second, but that's so much weight pressing down on your hands, you have to release back down. And so you're constantly going up and down. It's a terrible process. But these people, they said, okay, break their legs so that they'll just suffocate. They can't actually push back up. But that was because it had to happen before the Passover. But that's a big side thing. We'll get to that in 5 years. For right now, these people recognize that the Jews don't like Jesus, but they're not doing anything about it, which brings us to verse 27. But we know where this man comes from. And when the Christ appears, no one will know where he comes from. What questions do we have about this verse? John 7, verse 27.
I've one related to the one I asked about 26.
Go for it.
I guess it's partially answered, but why did the people talk as if they knew Jesus is the Christ and then make a statement that makes it seem like Jesus couldn't possibly be the Christ? Okay, so that's partially answered because y'all were saying it's like they didn't know he was, they were like suspicious of it. But I'm still wondering about that statement. Like they said, we know where he's from, but whenever the Christ comes, we don't know where he's from. We're not supposed to know.
Yeah. So what do y'all think about that? These people seem to be wrestling with something here. Why do you think that is?
Seems like a contradiction to what the Christ is supposed to be. Like we know where you come from. So it couldn't be.
Well, I think to answer the question in context, where did they get the idea that you want
Well, yeah, they've been waiting for a long time. Like they've had prophecy on top of prophecy from hundreds of years that they've been waiting for. And it's, things that they're taught and that they grow up with and that they're seeing. And each time that someone who claims to be a Messiah comes, they have to test it. They have to testify these things, these criteria. And there's so much of it that it's like, you can only remember so much at a time, even if you're well versed in it.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus even pointed out that the Pharisees missed things about the Messiah coming, and it was one of those things where they had to have, felt like, oh wait, but I thought we weren't supposed to know where it came from. Like we know this guy, he's from Nazareth, I think that kind of thing, and it's like they think they know what they're looking for, but they really don't.
Yeah. If we want a modern perspective of this, I say let's get 4 different pastors together. Doesn't matter. Just pick 4 different pastors from wherever. Just 4, just get like a thing of like 100 pastors within like a 10-mile radius, and pick 4 of them, put them in a room, have them give their perspective on Revelation. Right? So explain to us the end times. Explain to us what you think will happen. Most likely, each person will give a different answer, right? Some will say, like some might be very close, and they might just agree on something minor, right? They'll be like, ooh, well, I think that the seventh seal of Revelation is actually this. And they'll be like, well, I think it's this. Other people might be totally different. They'd say, actually, all of Revelation was fulfilled in the first century. And it's like, oh, okay. And other people might say, actually, so I think there's going to be a tribulation period, and the rapture, people are going to be taken up to heaven before the tribulation. And another guy's going to be like, I think it's going to be afterwards. And then another guy's going to be like, I think it's in the middle of it. And every single person is going to have a different perspective because there's a lot of verses and a lot of stuff to wrestle through. And honestly, we won't know the actual answer till we get there. Some, like, it's easier to define it, right? You can justify different perspectives. Everybody can have a valid perspective there. And it's good to really know as many as you can so that you can understand the signs. But ultimately, honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if God did it in a way that none of us were expecting. It's basically like a mix and combination of all the different perspectives. And it's like, there you go. None of us saw that coming. But that's basically what we have with the Messiah here. We've had 2,000 years to guess this. And you can read the New Testament. Paul seems to think that he was living in the end times. And every Christian since then has seemed to think, okay, it's coming, it's coming, it's coming. Because you look at the world around you, you see how sinful it is. You're like, it's got to happen soon. But now 2,000 years later, we're all still thinking the same thing, right? And every single person, the guy who wrote the Left Behind series, Tim LaHaye, he said, I am almost confident Jesus will return before I die. Well, he died a few years ago, right? So every person's believed that. Finn.
Yeah, it's like people are saying, oh, it's so violent nowadays. It's so terrible. And it's like, there were world wars.
Yeah.
Like,
the entire world was like fighting each other.
So, yeah, it's always been bad. And this is like the third plague in a century, I believe.
Yeah. And
It's funny. I've heard so many people doing that same kind of like, oh no, the end times, like, of course it's the end times, but like, it's coming soon, like the tribulation. And I'm like, and it's probably just the birth pangs. Like, you're probably,
maybe. It might be. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I'm saying that's a modern equivalent for what's going on here. These people have got a bunch of prophecies to deal with.
Yeah.
And some of them are evidently about the Messiah. Right? There's some stuff in Isaiah where you're like, all right, that's got to be the Messiah. But then there's some where it's like, okay, it says the Messiah is going to be this conquering king. But then there's like this Isaiah 53 passage which says that there's this servant who's going to suffer and die. Well, how does that correlate with the Messiah? Right? And so they think, okay, well, maybe there's two Messiahs. Maybe there's one who conquers, one who suffers. Or maybe it's one who conquers first and then later he suffers. Or in what we see is actually it's the reverse. Yeah. There's one who suffers and then later he's going to come conquer, right? But there's all this debate. Some verses are very clear. You're like, that's about the Messiah. Some you're like, I don't know. Like whenever God says to David, hey, your throne will last forever and you will have a prince who governs over Israel. And then you have later prophets where like, this is David's king. This is David's king. You're like, okay, that's the Messiah. Other places you're like, is that the Messiah? I don't know. And so what we see here is we see people in the midst of this debate, right? And they see Jesus here and they're saying, okay, is this the Christ? Like he might be, but then some people are like, I thought we weren't supposed to know where the Christ is from. And then whenever you get to verse 42, which we won't get to today, but when you get to that verse, people are like, well, everybody knows the Messiah is supposed to come from Bethlehem. Because if you go to Micah chapter 5, verses 1 and 2, it says that the ruler will come from Bethlehem. Well, apparently these people didn't necessarily know that. Or maybe they knew that verse, but they didn't know that applied to the Messiah. Or maybe they did know that and they mean something different. It could be that right here they're saying, well, yeah, we know the Messiah will come from Bethlehem, but like, we know Jesus. He comes from Nazareth, right? We're familiar with him. Like, how could he possibly, like, we don't know where the Messiah is going to come from, whereas we know this guy. So it's not necessarily, it's almost like the familiarity with Jesus, right? It's not even necessarily that they don't know the origin. It's that they're just too familiar with Jesus. They're like, no, the Messiah is going to be he's not going to be some carpenter from Nazareth.
They don't even know the real origin. He did come from that.
No, that's the irony of it, is because both of their answers are going to be correct, right? So in this verse, they say, we don't know where he comes from. In verse 42, they're going to say, everybody knows the Messiah comes from Bethlehem. Technically, they're correct on both accounts. Because yes, the Messiah does come from Bethlehem. Second off, well, actually, they're correct in three ways, right?
Egypt, yeah.
Because, well, no, like, so first off, they don't know where the Messiah comes from because, well, first one. Yes, the Messiah comes from Bethlehem. So that's correct. But then there's two ways in which they don't know where he comes from. One is because he ultimately comes from heaven. But secondly, they probably don't realize that Jesus actually came from Bethlehem. You'll notice he's never called Jesus of Bethlehem. He's called Jesus of Nazareth. Because if you remember, the year that Jesus was born in Bethlehem, around that time, all the babies were killed in Bethlehem. So they probably do not recognize that Jesus and his family escaped. And, like, for all they know, he was born and raised in Nazareth, right? They don't realize he was from Bethlehem. He was raised somewhere else. And so they're like, well, no, he obviously isn't from Bethlehem. That's the one place the Messiah, like, if there was a place where the Messiah is going to be born, it's Bethlehem. This guy's from Nazareth, right? Bethlehem is the city of David. Nazareth is the city of nothing. It's just some hill. Like it doesn't make sense. And so really they're actually correct without realizing it. But I think that's the point here. The point is that they're confused and they're saying, man, this guy seems to be doing the stuff the Messiah is going to do. I mean, there's like in Isaiah, it talks about the Messiah showing up. He's healing the lame, healing the lepers, giving the blind people sight. Jesus is doing those things. But aren't we supposed to not know where the Messiah comes from? Like, we know this guy. He's the son of Mary and Joseph. He was a carpenter. He grew up in Nazareth. We know his brothers and sisters. They don't even believe in him.
It's almost like they can also get caught up too much in the details of what they thought they were supposed to be looking for and, didn't see what it was standing in front of them the whole time.
That's the issue when we put God in a box.
So they'd be denying him or being shy. They say, no, not him, or not actually saying, like, how good it be? And the thing is, like, how good it be?
Well, and I think like what you're getting at there, that gets back to what are the main two goals of the Gospel of John? We say this almost every week. What are the two goals? It's the identity of Christ, right? That he is God. And what's the second goal?
That you may believe.
To show the nature of true belief. Right here is where we see people like at the intersection of those two things.
Right.
Because we're seeing belief being formed. Right? These people are like, I don't know. Do I believe in him? Do I not? I'm not sure. These people are genuinely wrestling with this, and it's all rooted on his identity, right? What does it mean to be the Christ? Where does the Christ come from? Like Jesus is saying he comes from heaven. We know he comes from Nazareth. The Bible says he comes from Bethlehem. Where is, what is this? And so they're wrestling through this idea, and you can see where their confusion would arise, but that's where what John's doing is so beautiful, right? It's like this is the intersection of it all. It's like they're wrestling with the nature of true belief, and we see that is rooted in a proper view of who Christ is. And once they come to realize that he is the Christ, that's when it's going to say they believe in him.
Isn't John in those conversations, but also the book of John is seeing him as king. So he's trying to play that out by spelling it, like showing it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's something that it's like a gradual revelation. Yeah. Really, every single one of the Gospels will do this. They've got like this perspective they're wanting to get, and over the course of the gospel, they'll build it up, right? They won't just throw it at you. I mean, to be fair, John does throw it at you in the prologue, right? He's like, by the way, in the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God, just so you know. But then once you get out of the prologue and you start in like verse 19, it starts building up, right? To where it takes all the way till chapter 20 when Thomas falls on his knees and says, my Lord and my God.
And he's assuming you've already read the others, the other gospels.
Yeah. And so with Matthew, he's presenting Jesus as the king. And so that'll be a gradual revelation to where when you get to the triumphal entry and Jesus declares himself king, you're like, yes, this is it. But then they reject the king. You're like, whoa. And so like with, I'm not going to spend too much time on that because that would just be a big tangent. But right here, we see the crux of these two things. And so that's why I think Finn's question is so important there. Like, why does it seem like they're calling him the Christ, but they also don't know if he's the Christ or not? Well, that's because they're wrestling with it. They don't know. That's the whole point. The point is that part of them is like, yeah, he definitely is. Part of them is like, I don't know if he is. Some things seem correct, some things don't, and they're trying to figure out what of these things are things that God definitely said, and what of them are just things that they thought God said, right? Like, did God say that you would not know where the Messiah came from? No, he didn't say that, right? I mean, yes, you have Malachi where it says the Lord will suddenly appear in his temple. Okay, that seems pretty sudden, but then you also have Micah that says the ruler will be born in Bethlehem. Okay, so it could be that their own perspective is warping it, and that's what they're wrestling with, and that's what we have to do as well.
Well, that's the thing. There's so many different accounts, like of the prophets that are looking forward to it. Like I was saying earlier, there's one that said, he will come out of Egypt, and for them, like that's not even Israel anymore. That's completely foreign to them.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, how do they even wrap their mind around that one? So it's one of those things where they obviously, you can see through their confusion that they don't know where he's going to come from.
Yeah.
It's like basically they're fulfilling the prophecy by themselves, not knowing.
Yeah. Well, also, whenever you get to wait, real quick. I cannot do that right now. But if you go to real quick Isaiah 53, we're not going to read through the whole thing. Just the very beginning. Actually, I'm not going to bother getting into that right now. Like, we could get into it. I'm not going to bother with it because that would just get us on a long tangent. But we know where this man comes from, and when the Christ appears, no one will know where he comes from. That's where they're at. They're wrestling with this. They're like, this guy seems like the Christ, but there's certain things that we believe about the Christ that don't seem to be true with him. Let's move on. So Jesus proclaimed, as he taught in the temple, "You know me, and you know where I come from. But I have not come of my own accord. He who sent me is true, and him you do not know." What questions do we have written down for this? Verse 28.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go for it, Finn.
I had another question about 27. It's probably easily answered.
No, that's fine.
But it's just, how did the people know where Jesus is from? Is he just that famous at this point? Is that it?
What do y'all think?
Yeah, like he just had so much.
I think too, like, I don't know if this is correct or not, like, because I don't know who would have access to these records, but they have a census, like everyone has to come in during a certain time, during this time actually, of the year, during these festivals, and a census is taken like when Jesus was born, and so it's like, they might know him, that, or like, no, they could tell by his accent or something that he's from Nazareth. I mean, there's a bunch of little things that you can pick up about a person, and you're like, you don't seem like you're from here, but you seem like you're close.
Yeah, from around here. How are you?
Jesus?
Oh, and how do they know where he was from?
Oh.
And I would say that the most simple answer is that he was just that popular, because also back then they didn't have last names, right?
Yeah.
Back then they had different things to identify them.
Yeah.
Nazareth, such a small town, you can just call him Jesus of Nazareth. There's probably, like, Jesus was a very common name, but apparently, like, either he was the most well-known Jesus in Nazareth, or there were just not that many people in Nazareth, and he's the only Jesus.
Yeah.
Like 1 out of every 10 people or something was named Jesus or something at this time period. But yeah, I would say he was that popular. By now, he's been preaching for probably 3 years, right? He's got about 6 months left. Wow, I wish kind of cracked or something. He's probably got like 6 months left. He's been teaching for 3 years. He's caused a big scene, right? There was one point where he had maybe 15 to 20,000 people sitting in front of him for like one sermon, and then he fed them, right? So people know who he is, and I would say that's probably how they know him. We know you, and if not, he's got 12 followers who can tell you exactly where he's from, and he probably has friends and other people who do definitely know who he is. So, so now verse 28. What questions do we have about that? On whose accord has he come by? Yeah, so he says, You know me and you know where I come from, but I have not come on my own accord. He who sent me is true, and him you do not know. So on whose accord did Jesus come? Honda accord? Yeah. Oh, he's gonna get to that.
Like they don't always say,
Yeah.
by knowing that.
Yeah, he is.
Well,
we haven't.
Yeah, he's kind of calling them out again too, because he's saying, I'm from the one, and the one who sent me is true, and you don't know him. Basically, they're saying like, you don't even know what you're talking about. Like, you don't know the truth.
Yeah.
You're just making up lies.
But to go back to Drake's question, on whose accord did he come? God.
God.
Right? Yes. That's the like.
I thought we were gonna. I
well,
thought
yeah.
we were like.
Well, it's because he who sent him, like, because once again, I'm trying to get us in the perspective of thinking from other people's perspective. For us here, we read this and we know the one who sent him is God. But I want us to make sure if somebody came in here and didn't know that, we're clarifying that for them, right? So the one who sent him is God, and the implication is that he came on God's accord, right? So, whenever they asked him about who sent John, did John come from God or did John come from man? Well, right here, Jesus claiming that he came from God. I did not come on my own accord. I came from God, right? So at the least, he's claiming to be a prophet. At the most, he's claiming to be much more than a prophet, right? But at the minimum, he's at least saying that he's a prophet, which means that he's got to speak the truth, or else they have the right to kill him.
Well, and that's what I was kind of getting at too, was he's made these certain claims before, similar claims to him being God's son, or the Son of God coming into the world, like not in direct phrasing like that, but in certain metaphor.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that they kind of get it now that they're he's claiming to be what they think he's claiming to be, and either they're wrong, which they don't want to accept, or he's a heretic and they have to kill him.
Well, and right here, what he's doing is putting a line in the sand.
Right.
Because by claiming to be a prophet, he is saying that his words have to be true, or else they have the right to kill him, right? According to the law, right? So he's saying the one who sent me is true. And so what would be the implications of this when you're considering all the previous things they've said, even going into what we talked about last week?
What they've been saying is false.
Yeah, and do you know what he's accused them of? Like, they came challenging him, and he says, y'all break the law. I don't break the law. No, you do these things, I do the good things, right? So basically, if he is a prophet, as he's claiming to be, at least, he's obviously claiming, we know that he's claiming to be much more than that, but from their perspective, to give him the benefit of the doubt, obviously, I would say that they didn't take, they have to kind of give him the benefit of the doubt, because if they were to see, oh, he is claiming to straight up be God right now, I mean, I think everybody would be like, kill him, because they probably think blasphemy. But assuming him to be a prophet, if he is speaking the truth, he has just called out the religious leaders and said, y'all break the law when y'all do these things. And it's like, oh, okay. Well, that would imply that they do. He has told them, y'all desire to kill me. If he's a prophet, that means that what he said is true, which would imply that when they denied it, they were definitely lying. Right? So right now what he's doing is he is saying you can't have both.
Yeah.
Right? Either what I'm saying is true because it's from God, or else I deserve to die because I'm a false prophet. Right? So right now he's giving them fuel for the fire. But there's something he says before that. So Jesus proclaimed as he taught in the temple, you know me and you know where I come from. Why does he say this in regards to what they just said prior to this? So he just, verse 28. So he just said, you know this and you know where I come from. What would be his implications here based on what they just said in the prior verse?
Almost like he's reading their minds. I don't know if they said this out loud or if they were just thinking. And then he answers them.
So whenever they say, we know where this man comes from, what do they mean? Where do they think he comes from? Nazareth.
Yeah.
He responds, and where does he claim to be coming from? Heaven.
Right.
But he just looked at them and he said, yes, you do know me and you know where I come from. So what is he saying that they know? Well, he's saying, you know I come from heaven. He's agreeing with them, but in a way different than, like from their ears, it sounds like he's agreeing, yes, I come from Nazareth, right? Because they're saying, oh, we know this guy. He comes from Nazareth. He's like, yeah, you know where I come from. But then he proceeds to say, but I don't come on my own accord. The one who sent me is true. And then he's like, whoa, 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 whoa. Hold up. Now it sounds like you said you're coming from God, and you're saying that we know you came from God. But you also just accused us of wanting to kill you, which means that we're wanting to kill somebody who came from God, which doesn't look good for them.
Well, that's the thing.
Would be the first time.
Yes. Well, what Jesus does here a lot is he's basically saying that they have not learned from their ancestors. Because throughout the Old Testament, every time a prophet showed up, the Jews would reject them and kill them. And the Pharisees, the Sadducees, all of them, they would say, oh, I'm so glad we're not like our ancestors who killed the prophets. And Jesus is saying, you're exactly like them. I'm a prophet, and you know where I come from. Like, it's not like there's no like plausible deniability here, right? He's saying, yes, you do know where I come from, and you know I don't just come from Nazareth.
Well,
You've seen the works I do. You know that I come from heaven. So the fact that you want to kill me testifies against you. It's like, ooh.
And I think he's kind of speaking to their, like, their kind of quiet suspicions in the back of their head that, you know, like, kind of nagging them, like, maybe he really is what he's saying he is. Maybe we are wrong. And it's getting in, the more he talks, the more it kind of, like, gets realer and realer for them. And that's the thing that's, like, they can't get out of that way of thinking where it's like, no, we're right, you know, and
It's not like a Star Wars quote, like, search your heart, you know it to be true. So something like that.
Social feelings.
Yeah.
You know what
Okay, I haven't seen Star Wars in forever. But that's like, in my mind, yeah, because these people we've seen, they're wrestling with it. They're like, we want to believe this guy's the Christ, but there's certain expectations we have of the Christ. He's not fitting it. And he says, yes, you know where I'm from. And you know I'm not just from Nazareth. You know I'm from heaven. You know I'm the Christ. And really, that's kind of what we have to do, right? I mean, for people who are doubting, it's like, look, like go to Romans chapter 1. Paul's like, everybody knows. Like, you can look into creation and you know that God exists. Like, deep down, you can deny it, and you can deny it so much that you stop believing it. But nobody is so dumb that they can just look at the world and be like, yup, that there's no God. No, the only reason they get there is because they deny it for so long that they begin to believe it, right? Like, even a child, like, there's been studies where children naturally, they have this tendency to believe in, like, this, like, creator, right? And so Jesus seems to be doing the same thing, but on a more intimate level. Not only do they know that there's a creator, they know that he is the Christ. He's like, I don't care if I'm not meeting the expectations that you set for me. You see the things I'm doing. You see the miracles I'm performing. You hear the teachings I'm saying. You know that I don't just come from Nazareth. You know I come from somewhere else. It's actually really cool. it's like a mic drop moment. Do y'all have any other questions written down for verse 20?
I was just going to say that, like, because they were the Pharisees and they knew Scripture from the Old Testament, like inside and out, backwards and forwards, like they would have known all the prophecies in Isaiah and Jeremiah, and they would have known what Christ was going to look like when he did come.
Yeah.
And they like flat out denied it.
Yeah, and the sad part is, at this point, they've been denying it for so long, they can't really back off. They should.
Right.
But the thing is, these people, they've got like a major pride issue. And so the more they deny it, like the deeper the hole they're digging. And so to admit that they were wrong, that would like just discredit everything they do. And so, are you all right?
No.
Oh. But the more, like, that's like, we're sinful, we're stubborn. The more we've stood for something, the less likely we are to change our minds. They have been debating with him nonstop, and now he's accused them of wanting to kill him. So if they admit that they're in the wrong here, they've got a lot to explain. And so basically, I mean, he's saying, you know, deep down, you know the truth, but they're not going to admit it because that would be admitting to a lot of fault, and these people are too proud to do that. And what we need to do, rather than just vilifying them, we need to realize that we tend to do the same thing, and we need to realize that we need to humble ourselves. And no matter what our faults are, You got to be willing to admit them and just turn away from them. Like we need to repent. We don't want to do what they did because we don't want to get to the point where God is looking at us and saying, you know that that's wrong. Like we want to get to the point where like, you know, we're like, you're right, God, yes, I know it's wrong. I'm going to stop. Like you're Lord, I'm going to listen to you. Do we have any other questions about verse 28? What? Awesome. Okay. So the one thing I did want to comment on, he who sent me is true, and him you do not know. This, once again, big accusation. He has just claimed to be a prophet, and a prophet is only allowed to speak, like if he's speaking authoritatively here, right? He's only allowed to speak on behalf of God. And he is saying that, like, as a prophet, God only speaks what is true. As a prophet, if he is only speaking the words of God, he is only speaking what is true. He is turning to the religious leaders. He is turning to the people who are in charge of the Jewish religion, basically, and he's saying, you don't know God. And he's not just saying this as a rabbi giving his own interpretation. He is saying, with the authority of God, he's looking at these people and saying, you don't know him. Can you imagine that? That's terrifying. It wouldn't be the same as walking up to a pastor and saying that. It would be worse. Like imagine walking up to just some pastor and be like, you don't know God. Like that's a big claim already. But the pastor, he's just somebody who's been in charge to a pastor is really supposed to be doing what these people were also supposed to be doing. But these people, they had given themselves so much authority that it's a much bigger claim. I mean, that's why it's so drastic whenever Jesus says, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the Pharisees, like the scribes and Pharisees, you shall not enter the kingdom of heaven. These people are like, what do you mean? Like, how can we possibly exceed their righteousness? They're the most righteous people we know. How can we exceed their righteousness? But then now Jesus is turning to the most righteous people that everyone knows. And he's saying, y'all don't know God. That's got to scare you. You know, you're like, whoa, they don't know God? Well, if they don't know God, do I know God? Like those people are, they never break the Sabbath. I mean, those are the people who get onto me when I pick up my mat. That's how holy they are, right? They don't even touch a light switch. They don't even touch an elevator button. Those are righteous people. Oh, obviously that's Anakin. I'm speaking to modern Judaism, because the issue still persists today, and I want us to recognize that. Pharisaical, whenever the temple was destroyed in AD 70, the Sadducees, they kind of died off because they were the priests, and no temple, no priests. The Pharisees, those were the common people. So whenever the temple was destroyed, the Pharisees created rabbinical Judaism, and basically what you see in Judaism today is the same thing that you would have seen from the Pharisees, but just translated to modern times. But interestingly, the Judaism of the Old Testament does not exist today, right? Because the Judaism that exists today, it's a totally different thing, right? If you read the Old Testament, you'll realize that Judaism cannot exist without a temple. It just doesn't work. There's got to be sacrifices, there's got to be a temple. If there's no temple, how can it work? So even Judaism today, it's not Old Testament Judaism. It's a totally new thing, which is really interesting because that would show that, okay, so even modern Judaism is a sect of Judaism. Christianity also is a sect. You've got to ask which one's the true one. Well, we would say that we do still have a temple, right? But God has made his temple in us, right? And so it's like, oh, interesting. That's just like a side comment. But moving on to verse 29.
We're the real Jews.
Yeah. I know him, for I come from him, and he sent me. What questions do we have in verse 29?
What does he mean that he comes from him?
Good question. What does Jesus mean when he says he comes from him being God? Obviously. What does Jesus mean? when Jesus says, I come from him, I come from God, what does he mean by that?
What does he mean by coming to
If
God?
I see it like without context, I'm gonna say his son, like, or
So maybe here's two questions we can ask. What does Jesus mean by it? How do these people interpret what he's saying? Those are probably two important questions to ask. My leg is totally asleep right now. And it's like tingling and it feels really bad. Just thought I'd let y'all know. Okay. So there's two questions. Let's ask the first one. No, let's ask them both together. What does he mean by it? How do they probably take it? So first off, what's he mean by it? When he says,
So
like, he said, I come
he
from him.
means, I come from him as in like, he and I are one. I come from him directly. But they're thinking of it as like, he is a heavenly being come down from heaven, who is either the Son of God or maybe an angel. They're probably thinking of something different because they don't understand anything except like the purest form of monotheism.
Mhm.
And so they think there's one God. And so for him to be claiming to be God, that's something that wouldn't even line up in their theological worldview.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, they think that he's saying he's from heaven, but not from God himself.
Yeah.
That's part of it.
So the way that Jesus means it is more literally than probably any person actually interprets it. Because he is saying, I come from him. And he literally means like he is God in the flesh. Like he is God, came from heaven to earth. Right? That's what he literally means. The way they interpret it is probably not, like there's probably not one single interpretation. And that's the beautiful thing. Because once again, these people, they're wrestling through this. They're trying to figure out who he is. And so there's different ways to interpret what he's saying. Okay, maybe he is claiming to be a heavenly being come down in the flesh. You know, that's not unprecedented. In the Old Testament, you have like the angel of the Lord. We don't know. I mean, we would look back and say, oh, the angel of the Lord might be Jesus, right? It might just be like before he came down in the flesh. But it could just be an angel of the Lord, right? Just a messenger, right? It could be, you know, Gabriel or something. So it could be that he's claiming to be an angel in the, you know, that's not unprecedented. It could just be that he's claiming to be a prophet, right? I came from him, right? I mean, okay, Ezekiel has a vision. He can now come to people and say, I came from God to deliver you this message, right? So there's different ways to interpret this, and that's why they can't just immediately condemn Jesus, because basically what he is saying, if they understood the implications, you basically have two choices. Either condemn him or worship him, right? Either what he's saying is straight up blasphemy and you have to kill him, or what he's saying is true and you need to get on your knees and worship him right now, if you actually understood what he's saying. But he says it purposefully ambiguous because his hour has not yet come. And so he says things to where it's like, I don't know what he means by that. He just says, I know him, for I come from him. So in contrast, he has just told them, you don't know God. I know God. Well, he means this much more literally than they could possibly understand. Because obviously, the straightforward understanding would be, you have no relationship with God. Whereas I do have a relationship with God. But he also means it much more intimately than that. He says, like, literally, you've never spoken with him. He's like, I've dwelt with the Father since the beginning of eternity. Right? So literally, you don't know him, I know him. It's way more literal than they even understand. That's the beauty of it. It's like, they get what he's saying isn't good for them. Yeah, because at the least, he's saying you have no relationship with God. Right? Whereas he does. So that'd be the least possible thing. So no matter what, it's not good for them. But at the most, for us, we realize these are big claims. He's saying, you don't know him. I know him because I'm from heaven. I've dwelt with him since the beginning of eternity. And I came from him. It's like, whoa, that's big. From them, you know, they're probably trying to be like, okay, from a Jewish perspective, you're probably not taking it that way. I mean, just to be honest, that would be totally unprecedented. The idea of God coming in the flesh, we can look back and we can see how that is what the Old Testament prophesied, but that's not where your mind's going to immediately go from a Jewish perspective. Because once again, like you said, there's one God, right? How can he be reigning in heaven while also dwelling on earth? And that's where I love that we referenced it multiple times. The one part where Jesus asked them, it's like, okay, whose son is the Christ? And they say, well, he's David's son. And he says, well, okay, well, if he is David's son, then why does David call him Lord? And it's like, oh, that's interesting. Why would you call somebody below you a title reserved for somebody above you? That's curious, right? So obviously it would be claiming that somehow David's descendant would be above him. He would be God, right? So we see how that's taught in the Old Testament, but from a Jewish perspective, you probably would read over that and be like, that's definitely not what that means. But I don't know. That's something interesting. Like from their perspective, they're probably just thinking, okay, he's going to be a prophet.
It's interesting too with like the Roman centurion. My mind goes back to him and like how impressive that must have been whenever he was assuming, what he thought was, or I mean, I don't know, he felt like he knew by faith at least that, he had authority over his servants and all he needed to do was say a word, and Jesus has authority over his servants, which I guess he must have thought were angels, and that means he's putting him up there with God, like automatically.
And that's why Jesus praises him for his faith, right? So he says, I know him, for I come from him, and he sent me. This is, once again, Jesus doing this. He does this all the time through the Gospel of John. He states things in multiple different ways, the same point, just so that there's no ambiguity. That's how the whole gospel starts out, right? In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him, basically, he's just stating the same point over and over in different ways so that you can't miss it.
That's what I was thinking of when you said, like, you haven't even had a conversation with God. Like, I've had a conversation with God. Like, his words are my words, and I am his word.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, and so here he's saying, okay, I know him, for I come from him, right? If I came from him, obviously I have to know him. But he also sent me. So it's not like he didn't just come on his own accord, right? He didn't be like, hey, God, by the way, I'm going to go down and talk to those people. He's like, no, I came because God sent me to do this. So God, like the Father, obviously, he's initiating. He's saying, go. And Jesus is saying, all right. And he goes. So not only is he a prophet, not only is he speaking what is true, not only is he obviously then speaking what God is saying, but his and God's will are perfectly intertwined. God says to do something, he goes and does it. Right? And so he's just stating all these things in the same way, but it's giving further nuance to it to where they're probably like, I don't know how to take this, man. Right? I mean, it sounds like what you're saying is a big deal, but I don't know if I can take it that way. And so it's really genius what Jesus is doing. He's really just, he's setting it up for his own death, right? Because right now, at the end of this whole thing, they're just going to want to kill him more, right? Because he's making them look like idiots. He's saying, you don't have any charges against me, but you want to kill me. And I hate to break it to you, but you're acting just like your ancestors because they wanted to kill the prophets. I'm a prophet. I came from God. I actually know God. I came from him. He sent me. And therefore, when I tell you want to kill me, that's a true statement. When I say you broke the law, that's a true statement. When I say that you don't know God, that's a true statement.
And for him to say that he sent him is saying, yeah, the Messiah you've been waiting for this whole time.
Yeah. That's how we would understand that's what he means.
Mm-hmm.
For them, they'd still be like, what does he mean by that? Is he just, once again, at the least, he's saying he's a prophet, right? He's not just claiming to be a regular man, right? Like right here, I'm not going to be like, hey guys, God sent me to lead this Bible study. Well, that'd be a bold claim, right? I mean, like I might be like, hey, I felt a calling on my life, and I think God wants me to go into ministry, and this is just one way where I'm trying to go about doing my service to God. But I'm not going to say God sent me to do this. That's a big claim, because if I'm saying that, well, then that means that, I don't know. That puts a lot more weight on everything I say. I better not teach anything wrong.
But if he's making the two claims that he is a prophet sent by God, and he's also been with God in heaven, from heaven, like how could he not be saying he's the Messiah in their head? It's like that's what I'm getting at.
Well, it's because of their perspective of the Messiah. Do they believe that the Messiah is going to be a heavenly being come down to earth?
Right, but I think
Not necessarily.
I think that that's getting to them is like, who else would be good enough to come from heaven if not the Messiah?
Well, they did have this belief that there was a prophet, right? Remember whenever they come to John the Baptist in chapter 1, and they say, "Are you the Christ?" He says, "No." Oh, okay. Are you the prophet? Oh, no, they say Elijah next, right? Are you the Christ? No. Are you Elijah? No. Are you the prophet? No. Right? So he says no to all these things, but they didn't know. Some people thought, okay, maybe Christ, whenever it talks about the prophet, this is at the end of Deuteronomy, right? Moses is giving his farewell address shortly before he dies, and he says, there will come a prophet like me, and he will do these great things. You need to trust what he says. And so some people, once again, this is the same issue we had earlier when we were talking about how some people saw things as applying to the Messiah, some people didn't, right? So some people would say, okay, there's this conquering king, there's this prophet, there's this suffering servant. Those are three different people. Some would say, okay, there's this conquering king, and then there's this prophet who's also suffering servant. There's two people. Or there's this conquering king who's also a prophet, and then there's a suffering servant. So there's another way of there being two people. What we see with Jesus is he's all three, right? He's the prophet, the conquering king, and the suffering servant. And it's in the exact order you would not expect. But so there's different debate about this. And so some people might hear what he's saying, okay, he's claiming to be the prophet. And that's what we saw in John chapter 6. People identified him as that, right? After he performed like the feeding of the 5,000 and stuff, they say, okay, we see that you're a prophet. But those same people also tried to crown him as king. But then they also didn't apparently fully understand who he was because they ended up rejecting him. So there's a lot of debate here. And so some people would hear this and they would say, yes, he is claiming to be the Christ. Some people hear this, they say he's claiming to be a prophet. Some people hear this and they're probably like, it sounds like he's claiming to be God. And these people are probably, I don't know, they're either really excited or really mad because they might be getting very zealous and be like, whoa, you don't claim to be God, which, I mean, that's a proper response. But that's when you got to look at what Jesus is doing and say, well, does he fit the bill, right? Because would somebody who, like, I don't know, like, has he done anything to make us doubt that? So we move on. Verse 30. So they were seeking to arrest him, but no one laid a hand on him because his hour had not yet come. What questions do we have about this verse? Okay, so how did they know that it was not the right time to arrest him?
Kind of
Because, like, wasn't he like in the crowd? Like, was there like some sort of festival going on?
There was a festival going on.
It was in those days.
I don't know, did they?
I don't think they would know. I think that John's implying that Jesus knew the time. They didn't know, but that he knew that it wasn't time.
Yeah.
I think there's something more holding them back that we don't really understand.
Yes, I would say that this is John. He does this frequently. He gives commentary, right? And so this isn't like the people being like, oh, we want to arrest him. He's not supposed to die for another 6 months. Can we wait? I don't think they're doing that. I think instead it's saying they want to arrest him, but there is something that prevents them from doing it. And John is over here basically in parentheses because his hour hadn't yet come. That's the reason why they couldn't do it. They don't realize why, but it's because God has this timetable, and whether they like it or not, they're going to have to fit into it, right? Even whenever it comes down to it, Jesus is going to be the one who decides, my hour has come, right? He's going to be like, hey, Judas, what you're going to do, go and do it quickly. And Judas is going to be like, what? Now? The time's ticking. Passover starts in a few hours, and I need to be dead by then and off the cross, so you better go get the people. Right, so but yeah, so yeah, no, but I think that the implication would be not that they knew. I don't think they knew that his hour hadn't yet come, because I think they think his hour came like years before. They're like, this guy needs to be dead. He needs to be gone. There's something preventing them, and we actually see in some instances where Jesus will just like disappear, and it's like did he sneak away? Did he just like poof? Where'd he go? Are you saying something, Brock?
I was gonna say for a split second, I was like, wait a sec, angelic crowd control, and then I remembered that Jesus probably did it all by himself.
Yeah, he's like, you can do it.
Yeah.
So hopefully that answers the question. I don't think that they knew. They weren't like, this isn't a good time for us. How about Passover? Come back Passover, we'll kill you then. I don't think that's what's happening here. I think that there is, if it's in line with the rest of the Bible, right? There is there's a whole unseen spiritual realm where things are going far beyond our understanding. I was in Daniel chapter 10 this morning, and Daniel in the story, he's been fasting for 3 weeks, and he's been wailing and crying out to God, and he's been mourning over for the fate of his people. And all of a sudden, this angel, it could be Jesus, it seems more like an angel appears to him, and he says, oh yeah, by the way, God sent me the day you started praying, so 3 weeks earlier. But he says, but there was this one angel, the Prince of Persia, not the video game, the Prince of Persia prevented me and he withstood me. And then Michael, like the archangel, right? Yeah. Michael had to come in and help me out. And now finally 3 weeks later I've arrived. And you're like, wait, what? like there's this whole 3 week span. There's this whole spiritual war going on. You don't even know. Like Daniel's been praying for 3 weeks. He doesn't even realize that the angel was sent 3 weeks earlier. And it makes you wonder. I wonder if the angel would have still come if Daniel had stopped praying on day 20. You're like, whoa. It's kind of crazy to think about. I don't know. Maybe he still would have. He would have been like, oh yeah, you only needed to pray for the first day. I was sent then. I don't know. But the point is that there is this whole spiritual realm. Ephesians chapter 6, right? Put on the armor of God because our war is not against flesh and blood, right? And so what we've seen in the Gospel of John is that God has his own timetable. He's going to do things his way. Jesus is going to show up. He's going to tell the disciples, hey, y'all go get some food. While he's chilling at this well, the Samaritan woman's going to show up. They're going to have a conversation. She's going to try to dodge some questions. He's going to still guide the conversation where it needs to go. And right at the moment he reveals that he's the Christ and she runs off, the disciples are going to come back up. The same time. So they didn't hear him say, I'm the Christ, but they also didn't miss the fact that this woman's running to go tell everybody something. So it's whoa. The timing is just perfect.
It's almost cinematic.
It's 100% cinematic. 130%.
We also see throughout John that Jesus is intentionally setting up that time.
Yes. Yeah.
He doesn't say things to certain people and doesn't reveal so that they don't have this incrimination right away.
Yes. No, it's very logistical, right? He knows this is John chapter 2, Mary comes to him, they're out of wine. Woman, my hour has not yet come. We laugh at, I know, whatever. But the reason why, I say it because I think there was some sternness there. I don't think he was being rude to her. I think he's saying, hey, my time hasn't come yet. What you're asking me to do, we don't even know what she's asking him to do. At this point, he hasn't performed any miracles, so I don't know what she was expecting of him. She was just expecting him to take care of the problem, I guess. He ends up going above and beyond, but you'll notice he doesn't, the miracle isn't public. Right? It seems like only the servants and the disciples know what happened. I don't even know if Mary knows what happened. Right? It just seems, some people knew he changed water to wine. The master of the feast, even the bridegroom, he doesn't know. He just thinks, okay, I guess we didn't run out of wine. This is good for me. Right? But Jesus, he's very meticulous about all of this. It's all according to a divine plan. And so right here, it's not they're not the ones contributing to God's timetable. God's just hey, it's not Jesus' time yet, so you won't be able to arrest him. We don't know what it was that prevented them. It could have been the crowd. It could have been the daylight. It could have simply been that they realized we don't have enough to accuse him of. Because they're saying, hey, he's claiming to be God. And then somebody's like, I don't know. It could be argued he's only claiming to be a prophet. And do we really want to be killing a prophet? John the Baptist has already got killed, and I don't know.
Well, yeah, they were
scared.
They were really scared of the crowd.
Yeah. And so we don't know what caused them to stop, other than the fact that it was God who caused them to stop. We don't know what kept them from it.
What reasons they might have had to have that God was influencing.
Yes. Yeah. Which is cool because that's what it's cool that we get to see that's what John put in there, right? John could have given us what's taught them, but instead he says, well, it's because his hour hadn't come yet. So he's like, I don't need to get into the reasons. All you need to know is that God's in control. His hour hadn't come. That's the reason why. Like you could say, oh, it's because they were afraid of the crowds. Oh, it was because it was daylight. Oh, it's because they didn't have enough tickets. You don't need to know. All you need to know is that his hour hadn't come, and therefore he couldn't be arrested. Because he can't be arrested until his hour's come. So it's like once you see that wrestle of like, God's sovereignty, human free will, right? Like, yes, they desire to do it, but something's preventing them. Does that mean that they don't have the freedom? Well, I don't know, does it? Right? It's like, you got to wrestle with that. That's a good question to ask, right? But John, he's not trying to answer that. He's just saying, all you got to know is they desired to do something, they couldn't do it. But then when it comes down to it, when they actually do arrest him, well, they still get blamed for it. So obviously they're held responsible for their choices. Oh, okay. But before we move on to, I guess, the last verse there, why do they want to arrest him? They want to kill him. What does that imply about the entire conversation that was just had? Yeah.
Well, they know who he's claiming to be. They know why he's calling them out and what he's claiming about them. That's the most important thing to them is he's bad news for them unless they change their minds and accept him. And so if he's that big of a problem, they want to eliminate that.
Yeah. You notice what we don't see here? We don't see them trying to justify themselves and be like, oh, we know God. I mean, they probably did do that. But if they did, they didn't offer any significant arguments because John doesn't present them. Instead, their response is, okay, we got to take this guy out, which testifies to the hardness of their hearts, right? They don't actually have anything that they can't justify themselves. He's claiming to be a prophet. He has said, you don't know God. And if they had a good response, it would be recorded. They don't. And so it just shows they wanted to arrest him. They wanted to kill him because he's right.
Yeah. If they realized it or not, they've already sold out to Satan. And they're just like, all right, we're just going to kill him.
Yeah. So now we've had 4 different perspectives here. Jesus has said, you want to kill me. They said, we don't want to kill you. The crowd says, they definitely want to kill him. And then now John, the author, he's the narrator, right? So he's giving us the definitive statement here. He's agreeing with Jesus in the crowd. And he's saying, yeah, they wanted to arrest him. And eventually we're going to, we've already read that they wanted to kill him prior, right? So the arrest would ultimately lead to death. They're not wanting to just put him in a jail cell. They're wanting to kill him. So this testifies against them because he has just said all these great things, all of which have been proven true. And the best they can do is not to defend themselves, it's to kill him, because that's they want to shut him up, right? It's not that they're not even trying to get along with him. They're not trying to be like, hey man, we can get along here. Like, yeah, you're a good godly guy. Let's work together. They realize we cannot live side by side with this person. We have no defense against it. And he's not going to stop. So the only way is that one of us has to shut up, and we're not planning on shutting up because we like our power too much. We like people to look at us. We like people to praise us. So we got to shut him up. Right? It's like, ooh, yikes. You can just, this is where the music's building up in intensity in the movie. You're like, oh, okay. And then they're swarming around trying to arrest him. And he's just gone. You're like, where'd he go? Then you hear like the beeping sound from 24. Doot, 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 doot. It's not the hour yet. And then we get to verse 31. Yet many of the people believed in him. They said, when the Christ appears, will he do more signs than this man has done? What questions do we have here?
It's a very good question itself to ask.
I mean, I think it's just kind of contradicting that it says that many people believe in him, and it says they said, like those same people, when the Christ appears, will he do more signs than this man has done? Meaning, like, they don't believe he's the Christ, but at the same time, they believe in him.
So, as it goes back to showing them, like, they're torn about whether he is or not.
So is that what y'all think? Because I would read it a little bit differently.
Yeah, I think they've already kind of gotten there, where in their minds they reasoned it out, even if they're maybe not exactly ready to accept it.
they pretty much believe it already. Like it's their inner knowing that's telling them, like, you know, and that's the thing that's kind of what I was saying earlier, is if he's claiming all these things, that he's from heaven itself. Like, I don't know if any other Messiah has claimed to be from heaven, or any person who claimed to be the Messiah has made that claim.
It's a big claim.
But that's a big claim,
Yeah.
you know, and it's one of those things, and they've seen it. They've seen everything he's done, that it must be from heaven. Like, that he's from God, of God. If not, how could he do these things?
Yeah.
I think what Anna's getting at is like how, like, if someone's performing his miracles, it seems like it should be obvious that this is the Christ. But I think that's the point of it. It points to the fact that, like, it's not the fact that whether he's doing miracles or not, or how many he's done. That's not why they don't believe.
Well, I think, let me see if I could take this question and put it in like a modern tone, right? So imagine that I were to get on my knees and pray to God, and I'd say, oh God, is there a God? Like, is there a God who could do the great things that you do? That's not me questioning God. Rather, it's me acknowledging that God is the most powerful, right? So I think when they're asking this, I don't think that they're saying, is this really the Christ? I think they're saying, when the Christ comes, will he be able to do more than this? The implication is no. Like, the implication is that they've seen the signs and they're responding correctly to them, right? So this puts them in contrast to the people in chapter 2. The people in chapter 2, you know, they saw the signs Jesus was performing. They believed in him, but Jesus didn't entrust himself to them because he knew their hearts. Those people saw the signs and were like, ooh, he's cool. These people see the signs and they say, he's the Christ. Like, if the Christ came, would he be able to do more than this? There's no way.
It's almost like
So
they're trying to argue for him.
Yes. Yeah, so I think that would be the implication here. I think that their belief is genuine. I think they're saying, if the Christ came, would he be able to do more? No. Like, this guy, he has proven himself. Like, the words he's saying here, they're true. I think that's what's being said here, which is really cool. Once again, we just see that contrast where John says, superficial belief, genuine belief. Chapter 2, people in the temple seeing Jesus performing signs, they believe it's not true. These people, they see the signs and they see beyond the signs. They say these signs testify to the fact that he's the Christ. He's not just a miracle worker. He is the one who came from God, the one who is going to rule over the world. Right? They see that, they're like, got it. And it's such a fitting conclusion to this, because right here, they're choosing their side. Right? They have now rejected the religious leaders. Right? Don't miss that. These are the people who've been in charge of them. And these people want to arrest Jesus. But these people are saying, he's the Christ. Like, we believe him. Like, they're on his side. Which is going to be really interesting in 6 months when he returns. Because a lot of times they get a lot of flack because we think, like, people always say, oh, the same people who sung Hosanna to him as he came into the city are the ones who, like, shouted, crucify him. No, not really. No. Like, they're shouting, crucify him at like 6 in the morning. Most of the people singing Hosanna were still asleep in their tents.
Right.
The people who yelled, crucify him, those are the religious leaders who had gathered in the dead of the night to murder him. The people who sang Hosanna, they're the ones waking up at 9 in the morning, going to walk into the city, and they look up on a cross and they say, is that Jesus? Like, what's he doing up there? You know, and then he's dead soon, right? So I don't want us to, sometimes we conflate that. We're like, oh, wow, how did these people turn? Well, they didn't. Some of them genuinely believed. And that's why even after, you know, whenever you get to Pentecost, there's like hundreds of people gathered together praying, right? So that is something to keep in mind. But
that passage too, it's showing that it's growing. You know, that his crowd is growing, and that's even more for the Pharisees and Sadducees to be afraid of.
Yeah. And a lot of times people will accuse, because a lot of times John just uses the term the Jews, and a lot of times people will accuse John of being anti-Semitic, which is ironic because John himself was a Jew, so that wouldn't make sense. And it's like, but then people will be like, oh, well, maybe he's just against Judaism because he was a Christian. And it's like, well, no, because John viewed himself as a Jew, because the most Jewish thing you could do is submit to the Messiah, right? So John still loved the Jewish people. And what we see here is that we see that he doesn't have anything against the Jews, right? Here he's admitting Jews are coming to Christ, right? They're not all bad. It's just there's certain ones that are rejecting him, and it's usually the authorities, which is sad. That's the bad thing. A lot of times it's so easy to just like conflate things and just basically tell everyone, okay, you're all in this one camp. No, like throughout all of history, like there's people whenever they're being marched off to Babylon, right, punished for their sins. There are some people who did not deserve to be marched away, right? They're having to suffer for the sake of others. Like you have like Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. They were young, but they were faithful servants of the Lord. And they're only like what? They're like in their early teens when they get marched off to Babylon, right? They haven't they're getting punished for the sins of their fathers, right? So we don't want to think that every single person of the Jewish people, they were all just like apostate, like hated God. No, there were faithful people throughout all of this. And I think we need to remember that. It's not that all the Jews are bad here. Well, it's just certain ones, they're antagonistic against God, but certain ones are also submitting to him. And that's really cool.
There was even some Pharisees like Nicodemus who eventually
Eventually, yeah.
Jesus.
So they said, yeah, many of the people believe. I just like how John does that, right? It could just be such a sad note. It's like, oh, everybody's rejecting him. It's like, no, many believe. Don't worry. Not everybody had, not everybody was blinded. Not everybody was deaf. There were some people who had eyes to see and ears to hear. Whenever Jesus said, "You know where I come from," they heard loud and clear.
Who was the prophet who was kind of lamenting, thinking that he was like the only one left?
Elijah.
Elijah, yeah.
It's a funny story. Yeah. But do we have any other questions about this? We got it's about to time us out in 4 minutes, so I'd like to wrap up and pray so that we can get out of here without having to restart it. But do we have any other questions about this verse? We're finishing a little earlier today.
It's well covered.
You're welcome. Anything? Yeah. All right. Well, we will pick up with, man, I was really expecting us to cover more today. I love moving slowly, but we're going to spend like 30 weeks in chapter 7.
You should stop having such high expectations.
Yeah, I know. Lower my expectations. But yeah, good discussion. I don't think there were too many tangents. I think it was just more in depth, so that's good. There was like one tangent and it didn't go too long, so that's good.
I did notice how high your voice got, better the tangents were.
My voice got higher?
Yeah,
Really?
I appreciate
I was getting passionate. All right, well, can I have somebody pray us out? Brock, go for it.
God, thank you for this all gathered here, for getting us off the cold. And, thank you for letting us get to learn more about you without having to deal with authorities getting in the way or trying to take away that. I ask that you place your hand on these elections and that every vote goes to glorify you at the end. We love you and thank you for everything. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.